What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pursuit of Progress podcast. I'm Adam Lang here with my co host, Ben Adams. And today we're actually going to be flipping the script because sometimes the fastest way to learn how to win is to study how people lose. We're going to be diving into 7 habits that keep people poor, patterns that quietly kill progress, wealth, and even freedom. Ben, he's reviewed thousands of financial files as a mortgage expert, and I've also seen how these same habits show up in the real estate world. So, you guys are going to make sure you want to stick around for habit number 5. Ben's actually going to be sharing a personal story that cost him tens of thousands of dollars. It's raw and it's real, and it's exactly the kind of lesson most people only learn the hard way. With all of that being said, let's get into it. But before we do, welcoming back Ben to the show. What's up, bud?
What is up, my man? How you doing? How's your week been?
Doing good, buddy. It's another beautiful fall day. A couple days left in the month, depending on when people are listening to this. We're kind of just fast, very, very fast going through the year and only a couple months left. And it's time to really focus and hopefully for a lot of our audience too to, make these last couple months count in 2025. What about you, man?
Gear up for the Q4 push, and then crazy to say, but 2026 is right around the corner. Once we get past Halloween, all of a sudden we're in November, Thanksgiving, days, Christmas, and then we're into 2026 just like that.
Crazy, dude. Well, I'm excited. This one's going to be fun just because you have a ton of wealth of knowledge on this topic
Yeah.
and some really good habits to share with our audience just to make sure they don't fall into this poor mindset and hopefully take this and apply it to their lives these last 2 months of the year.
Yeah, I have this titled Instructions on How to Stay Poor. Now, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because none of this is taught in school. And if you're like me, you probably never had any formal financial education. Now, some of the pushback that I get with that sometimes is financial education, financial literacy should be taught at home. What I always say, though, to that is that 79% of Americans either live paycheck to paycheck or have less than a $2,000 emergency fund. So our parents, in most cases, aren't really qualified to teach us this stuff because they never learned it either. Now, the difference between baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials and Gen Z is that the stakes are higher, costs are higher, housing is much more, wage growth has not kept up with inflation and costs and everything else. So this stuff matters more now today than it did for our parents and grandparents' generation. And so I hope that you take some value from this. And let's go ahead and start off with habit number 1. And I don't think this is going to shock anyone, but it's so important because this is the number one thing that holds people back. And what I don't think they realize is how much it holds folks back. And what that is financing a depreciating asset. So, yes, financing a depreciating asset is the number one wealth killer in America. Essentially, we're financing things that lose value. Now, most of the time when we think about that, we're going to be thinking about cars and automobiles, but that also applies to toys, things like boats, phones, RVs, campers. They feel good, but they drain your future. A $70,000 truck, for example, loses $14,000 the moment you drive it off a lot. 5 years later, it's worth half of that. Meanwhile, the asset's going down in value. Meanwhile, you're paying interest to have it go down in value. You're making monthly payments. That cash flow is disrupting things that you could be doing with other investments or personal growth or putting that money to work for you. So this isn't freedom. It's financial gravity that pulls you backwards. Don't rent status, buy assets.
Love that. Yeah, one thing that I think of on this first habit is some advice I got. I don't know if it was from a specific influencer or an author. I can't remember where I heard this, but they talk about, like with depreciating assets and some of these toys, cars, boats, electronics, whatever it may be. When you get to that point of right now in this society we live in, especially with credit cards and online shopping, it's so easy to just fall into this quick decision making where maybe you have some regret afterwards after buying something, or at least you don't give it the necessary, the level of thought that it needs to really decide if this is appropriate to buy or not. So just anytime you have a big purchase, instead of initially purchasing it, just put it in your cart and then give it at least a day, maybe even a week, and then come back to it and still decide whether or not you want to purchase it, and just give yourself that time. And it's amazing how often when you do this, you kind of come back to reality and you realize, you know what? Yeah, it'd be great to have, but all these other aspects of by buying that, what it's going to mean to your lifestyle. And you have to work extra hard just to afford to pay for that, not just today and tomorrow, but next year, next 5, 10 years, depending on what kind of a loan you might be getting on some of these things.
Well, undoubtedly, I was having a conversation with my brother today exactly about this exact thing. The average new car payment right now in the United States is over $800 a month. Just
Oof.
think about all the different things that you could do with that, the freedom that you could buy with that. So, for example, we love going down to Tucson, Arizona every Thanksgiving. We have a mini family reunion down there. And, we have to buy airfare for our families. He's got 4 kids, and there's some cost to that, obviously. But when you don't have a car payment that you're making payments on, $800 a month, you're able to do things like that and allow for and create experiences that you're really going to remember. You're
Hmm.
not going to remember what car you drove 20 years from now. You're not even going to care, but you will remember some of those experiences and memories.
And one last thing before we move on to the next habit is, I think this is really valuable. I've used this personally in the past, is if you're an hourly waged employee at the time right now when you guys are listening to this or watching this on YouTube right now, let's just say as an example, you're making 25 bucks an hour and you have that $800 a month car payment that you're considering. Break it down into a tangible way for you to understand what it's going to really take to afford that. So let's just say $800 at a $25 an hour type position that you might have. That's equivalent to 32 hours in the month that you're going to have to work just to break even on that new purchase. So, let's just round that up even to 40 hours a month. That's basically 10 hours a week. If you're working a Monday through Friday job, that's 2 extra hours a day that you have to work just to afford to break even on whatever that payment is. That's not including some of that depreciation and other stuff you're talking about. But when you break it down like that, then you're like, crap, man, do I really want to work instead of getting off at 5? Now I gotta, find a second job or figure out a way that I can work extra hard just to make enough money to afford that. And when you break it down like that and you start thinking about it, you're like, man, is it really that boat's gonna be great, 3 months out of the year, but the 12 months of the year that I have to pay the note on it, is it really worth that? That's just a nice way to kind of
That's
bring
what I
yourself
always
back
say.
to reality.
You like to spend time up in Grand Lake, and I always say for folks that don't live on a lake or they don't have that access, like if you're only going to use your boat a couple times a year, just go rent. You can rent
Mhm.
a boat for a weekend, and then you don't have to deal with the depreciation, the maintenance, all the problems. Same with some of these toys, ATVs, RVs. You don't actually want to own that stuff. But I think people get confused sometimes where they think that they're investing and that these assets have value. But like you just said, if you're making payments on something and you're paying interest and you have a loan on it, but then at the same time it's rapidly losing its value, that's the opposite of investing.
Definitely. Let's jump into the second habit. Again, these are habits. So these are kind of a double negative in a sense. We're talking about habits that you want to be not doing. These are habits to avoid. These are habits that are keeping people poor. So another habit that's really important to try and avoid at all costs is avoiding financial education. And this is one that's so much easier to be good about nowadays, just with how many resources we have. So, you think through just, primary education, first through 12th grade, you have 12 years of math, algebra. You have 0 years of learning how credit, taxes, or compound interest work. That's not a coincidence, in my opinion, at least. I think Ben's as well. Most people stay broke because they just never got the manual. They never got the right advice. And the craziest part about this is that manual now is completely free. You have so many resources between
Yeah.
YouTube, podcasts like we're hosting every single week for you guys, just all kinds of resources out there that, for the most part, are completely free. And the only reason that people aren't doing them is they're just lazy. They're just not willing to be resourceful enough to find them. And you think through, like, for example, Netflix, how much time are you spending a day on social media, watching, Netflix, that kind of stuff? How much could you maybe spend? And I get it. End of a long day, you don't want to just be diving into financial literacy courses on YouTube for 4 hours a night. But, instead of maybe watching 3 episodes of your favorite show, watch two and then maybe dedicate half an hour in the evening to do something a little bit more proactive and serving yourself rather than just kind of that mundane stuff. Money really rewards knowledge and it really
Yeah.
punishes ignorance. And this is another one that's just a habit that so many people fall into. And I think the older people get and the longer they become kind of consistently kind of stagnant and just, they become very set in their ways where they don't even, want to consider doing this after years and years of doing the same thing every night, turning on the TV and going to bed and just, never putting this as a priority.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because a lot of this conversation is focused around financial literacy and financial resources. But what's the one resource you can never get back? That's time. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't ever consider. And that's kind of quasi in the financial literacy world. A lot of it is, but then it's also kind of outside of that. But to your point there, I think that's why it's so important. You have to have a very compelling vision for yourself. You have to have goals. You have to have things that you're working towards and you want to accomplish. Otherwise, if you don't, it is very easy to hop into bed and watch 3 Netflix. But if you have that, if you're on mission for something, then you're going to have that motivation. When you have that big vision, it gives your daily actions, habits, and behaviors more meaning. And so it's not just the time, it's not just the monetary stuff, the subscriptions, the cost, but it's also your time, man.
hmm The last thing I'll say on that one too is you have to make it bigger than yourself. You have to have the reason for motivating yourself to go watch that hour of YouTube a night and learn about financial literacy or whatever it may be, some way of improving your life. You have to have it be something that's bigger than yourself to kind of push you through on those days that you don't want to get up and do it.
I always remind myself because I have that same self-talk with myself, that same conversation, and I tell myself, "This is what the dream looks like. This is what the journey is." And it has nothing to do if I want to. I'm doing what's required because I know what 10 years from now is gonna look like, and I'm gonna thank the Ben in 2025 that was willing to do the work. Well, let's move on to number 3. This is habit number 3 for instructions on how to stay poor. Mismanaging credit, number 3. Bad credit is like a slow leak in your roof. You don't see the damage until it's done, until it's everywhere. 30 days late on a payment, you can lose 100 points or more on your credit score. Now your car loan, your insurance, your next rental, everything gets more expensive. And you know who profits? The banks. And these are also little tips as well because we get so focused on payment history when it comes to credit, but we got to keep in mind about that credit utilization with revolving accounts. So credit cards, home equity lines of credit. You have to keep that credit utilization under 30%. If it goes over 30%, your score will start to drop like a rock. And of course, you've got to make payments on time. You need to treat your credit with respect or it's going to destroy your options and you will literally pay for it. And this is one of the things that I see every single day in the mortgage world. I mean, that's a big part of my job. I am reviewing credit applications all day long. And the lack of awareness and knowledge around credit, you could also throw this into the financial literacy category. People don't know how to manage correctly. I was working with an individual here in the last couple of weeks, and he had all these different buy now, pay later loans. I mean, I'm talking individual items but like 50, he had financed 50 different individual items. I'm not talking about in-store charge cards or like a Costco card or a Costco American Express. I'm talking about individual purchases like a purse or a bag or a sweatshirt and and turning that and making payments on that. And it's very predatory from a lending perspective, but you cannot fall into that trap. It might be easier and it justifies the fact that you can go buy this stuff, but you are playing their game. And if you play their game, you will never be able to win.
hmm yeah, that's great. I'll give you guys a quick plug on this one and really a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. But Ben and I are actually going to be hosting another one of our monthly live free online masterclasses right after this. But we do them every single month. And a big part of the content we frequently cover on those is all about just more actionable tips on how to improve your credit score to prepare to buy a home in the future. So if that interests you guys at all, when Ben's talking about this credit related stuff, mismanaging your credit, that credit utilization score, make sure you guys grab a free seat to the next one. If you guys just go to webinar.adamsellsdenver.com, you can grab a free seat there. And with that, yeah, let's just jump right into number 4, habit number 4, because this one also has to do with credit. So another thing that is just try and avoid this at all costs is using credit for stuff that doesn't pay you back. So one thing that Ben and we never ever see this. And what is it? Well, it's somebody that has, let's just say, $20,000 in credit card debt who also owns a rental property because the mindset just doesn't match there. We've trained ourselves to use debt for cars, couches,
Mhm.
maybe a cruise with your family. but never for the important stuff that serves you, like cash flow. Smart people, they actually use credit to acquire income producing assets, real estate, businesses, stuff that actually earns you a return on your investment. Ask this next time before you swipe that credit card or you try and get out another loan, like Ben was just talking about. Is this going to make me richer or poorer a year from now? And I understand there are certain things. We all are human beings. We all like, stuff. We all have certain things we're passionate about. So you don't have to take this completely to the far, far end of the spectrum, but this is at least a good exercise just to maybe hopefully reel it in a little bit and just really start to make sure that you're understanding what really does and doesn't serve you and what's really important in life.
You're either going to have that consumer mindset where you spend, where you purchase, where you're focused on consumption, or you're going to have that investment mindset. These don't mix here. They're
Hmm.
they're they're very opposites. And so you're not going to see someone that has a thriving investment portfolio that also has tens of thousands of dollars of credit card debt and is paying crazy interest on that. It's because they're different philosophies, they're different mindsets. We're talking about good debt versus bad debt. And I think for me, like I had to make the decision, am I a consumer or am I an investor? And once you take on that identity, you start thinking about all of your purchases differently. And you just led on to this a second ago, but one thing I always ask myself, I just go 10 years out right now. Is this gonna am I gonna be better off by making this purchase 10 years from now? Or am I not? If I'm thinking about financing something or if I have that temptation, how is this going to impact my ability to plan for my retirement, grow my investments, plan for the next investment property? And a lot of times, once you start asking the right questions, you're going to get the right answers.
Very well said.
All right, let's move on to habit number 5, excessive consumer debt. Now, this one's personal. 10 years ago, and this is the one that you guys, I hope that you're hung around for. So, this one's very personal for me. 10 years ago, I started a business with $50,000 credit card cash advances. Man, I was so excited to get this business started.
Tell the
And in
people what they
hindsight,
want. Tell the people what they
worst
want. We want to
idea
hear.
ever.
We want to hear what this idea was. Tell us about
Just a
these.
terrible, terrible idea. What it was is I was living in Phoenix, Arizona. My wife at the time had an idea or an invention for a high heel wrap, and it was a women's stiletto shoe accessory. And so to this day, I think it's a cool idea. It's fun. There's kind of a fashionable component. But what am I doing getting messed up with this? I know nothing about women's fashion, about women's shoes. I think it's a cool idea, but I'm just not qualified to even really have an opinion because I know nothing about women's fashion, women's shoes. Is this something that women would wear? And so this women's shoe accessory, I literally took out tens of thousands of dollars in cash advances on credit cards. Mm, And what happened I maxed out all my credit cards. And because my credit utilization rate was over 30%, my 800 credit score went all the way down into the low 600s, even though I was making the payment on time because these revolving accounts were all maxed out. So after about a year, I realized, you know what, we got a real problem here. And then I did have equity in my home, and that wasn't an option though, because I didn't have the credit score, so I couldn't access any of my home's equity to kind of bail myself out. Now we ended up moving back to Colorado at the time, so this is 10 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona. So the timing worked out because we ended up selling that property. We were able to get the equity out, pay off the debt, and then move back to Colorado, but it was such a powerful lesson on what not to do. I put myself in a terrible, terrible position financially. I financed all of that. Credit card debt, and then pursuing something that I didn't know. So it is a personal story, but I love sharing that because you know I have American Money 101. I talk about personal finance a lot, but trust me, I have made more mistakes probably than most people out there when it comes to money. I've learned the hard way.
Yeah, but I bet you those hard life lessons are probably also the what have really motivated you to get even more fiscally responsible, really passionate about what it is that you're doing today. You have to look at some of those speed bumps, some of those failures as just, nudges in the right direction for something with a bigger purpose down the road. I
Yeah,
think
that's
just one
right.
last
And
thing.
that's also why I want to be able to help others because I think a lot of other people have the same questions. They might have the same goals. They don't know how to do things. Is this a good idea? And I think once you can get the conversation started and have a resource or a community where you can share ideas, have mentors, and get the information that you need, you can make better and more informed financial decisions.
Well, let's move on to we got two habits left, you guys. So number 6, again, things that you do not want to do if you unless you want to stay poor, which hopefully you don't. So number 6 is relying on just one source of income. And this one is a little bit challenging, I think, maybe for any of you guys listening or watching today that maybe have a typical traditional 9 to 5 job where you're an employee, not a entrepreneur. But there's also intrapreneurs, meaning that you are still employed by somebody, but you're taking it under a different lens where you are still trying to grow the company and be a bigger part of it. So I think maybe first thing I'd like just to say is if you are an employee, figure out ways that maybe you can become more of an entrepreneur and not just a 9 to 5 employee. But what this one's about is just how important it is to not rely on one source of income. The average millionaire today actually has 7 streams of income. The average broke person has one, and they call that job security. And I've worked with a lot of high income clients who still, believe it or not, live paycheck to paycheck. And that's because they've just never diversified. And when that job goes, so does their lifestyle. And this is not a place you want to be in. So just think through this. Maybe it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but have this as maybe one of these goals that you're going to be trying to take a step in the right direction day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Start small, build a second stream. Maybe it's real estate, maybe it's an online business, maybe it's a high heel shoe accessory. I hear there's a huge market for that. Maybe it's another side hustle. Anything that pays you without clocking in. Wealth is built on systems, not salaries.
I love that too, because I think a lot of people think that they need to go quit their 9 to 5 in order to start the next thing. And I actually think that's the best way to start off. You have the comfort and the security of your 9 to 5, but then, you're working on that side hustle on the weekends or after hours and growing that income. For example, my girlfriend Grace, she does that with us. She started off as the kids' tutor, and that was kind of her side hustle, something that she's very passionate about. She's good at it, and it allows her to earn a little bit more, but it's also still in line with what she does with her primary job. So I think sometimes that having when you can stay engaged in something that you're good at, maybe even if it's aligned with your primary job, I think that's really, really important. So a lot of the side hustles that I've done in the past have been aligned with what my primary job is, just because I already have those skills built out. And so if you can do something that is kind of, complements that, where you have that strong set of skills, that can be a great place to start. But you definitely want to have those multiple revenue streams, because ultimately, same thing. I don't know if you saw the economic news, but I shared this earlier today. UPS laid off 60,000 people. Wells Fargo's gone through layoffs. Ford, Amazon, 30,000. So there are some concerning things in the economy right now. But if you are responsible for you, if you have that mindset where you're growing your skills, you're taking control and accountability for your life, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, I think one last thing I'll share on that one is for any of you guys that haven't really leveraged AI, consider using ChatGPT and just use it almost like I don't know what the best way to describe this, but you could just tell ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, start asking me some questions to help me determine maybe some potential side hustles for me to get involved in. Here's what I currently do. Here's what I'm passionate about. Here's the amount of
Yeah.
time I have available to dedicate to this. And I think one challenge a lot of people have, myself included in different points in my life, is just the unknown of like just feeling overwhelmed. Like I don't even know what I could do, or there's just this lack of just direction. And that's one area where I think ChatGPT can be really helpful. Is just to at least maybe start putting your mindset in a different place. Start maybe thinking about ideas that maybe you haven't thought of before.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And find someone else to share the workload. Have an accountability partner. Have a partner that is willing to do this with you. I think when you're doing something like this, there's going to be certain things that you like about the side hustle, and maybe it's a side business. There's going to be things that you're good at, things that you enjoy, but there's also going to be things that are part of that are very important that you're not going to enjoy. If you have someone else there that can complement your skills, and your skills don't overlap, and they're willing to do some of the things that you don't like to do, and they're doing other things, that's a great way to get started. So I suggest that as well. All right, well, moving on here. Habit number 7. And this one is dangerous because it sneaks in through the side door, or is it the back door? Habit number 7, lifestyle creep. Yep, I said it. You get a raise and somehow your bank account looks exactly the same, because I see people do this frequently. They figure out how much more they're going to get paid per month. I'm going to have $700 more per month coming in. Well, now I need to go find a payment for $700, and they figure out whatever the thing is. And usually, kind of going back to point number one there, usually it's something that is financing a depreciating asset. It's some type of toy, or maybe it's a new car. They get the raise, they have the extra money coming in, and then they go find a payment to take up that extra money. It could be a nicer vacation, or they're upgrading their lifestyle in general. Here's the concern. When your income goes up, your investments should go up, not your monthly payments. If you turn every big raise into a bigger liability, that's a problem. You're not progressing. You're just buying bigger and shinier chains. Automate your wealth. Don't inflate your lifestyle.
Yeah, that one is easier said than done. I think most people at least, become a victim of this in some level, and I have myself as well. But I think it's one of those other ones where I think once you've done this a couple times and really paid the price, I think this one stings quite a bit. Just especially with the new car, vacations, just stuff that you can put on a credit card, even like vacations where yeah, I'll pay for it later. That kind of mentality.
Yeah, and I shared a couple of my big losses. Let me share a win with you. And after that painful loss coming out of Phoenix, Arizona, where I had to pay off the $50,000 in credit card debt, um, I kind of learned my lesson. And so now being here in Denver, there's been some really positive years with the economy and banking, but I'm still living the same lifestyle that I was 10 years ago when I was on a $70,000 salary. My expenses, my mortgage payment, I never upgraded my car. I never upgraded my house, never did any of that stuff. And I am so thankful that I did, because these last 3 years in the mortgage world, they've been challenging. And when you don't, and so not having to deal with the monthly payments, I've seen car payments for 1,300, 1,600, 2,000. When you don't have to make those payments because you never put yourself in that position, you have so much more freedom and clarity of mind.
Well, I think that was a really good episode. I think, just lots of different, takeaways, different actionable items for people to hopefully implement, even if you just took one thing from today. I think all of these, though, that we shared are all very, very important habits to avoid at all costs. So, just kind of want to wrap it up with this, you guys. Here's the deal. Most people, they stay poor, not because of bad luck, but because of bad patterns. They finance status, they avoid learning, they misuse credit, they don't own assets, they drown in debt, they bet on one paycheck, and they spend every single raise that they get, like Ben just said. If that's the path to poverty, then the path to progress is the exact opposite. So start small, learn daily, build systems, buy assets, and just protect your freedom at all costs. This, as always, guys, is the pursuit of progress where we call out the truth, even when it stings, because it's that truth that will set you free. So, if this helped you, share with somebody you know, somebody you care about. And don't forget, every single Friday, we have new episodes coming out on YouTube as well as all podcast platforms. And with that, hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on the next one.
Love you guys. We'll see you next week.
See you guys.